Hey, welcome back to Blurry Creatures. This is part 2 of the Travis Roy episode. If you haven't heard part 1, then this won't make any sense. So go back to part 1, listen to that first, and we're going to hop right back in here. All right, thanks.
I know that Travis had some honorable mentions as well.
There was one I was going to say. There was 500 skulls.
Let me pull that one up here.
This is like sheer volume, guys. If you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, okay, couple skeletons, that can be fake. Just listen to the volume here.
Right. Yeah, this is from 1908. Outsiders who have more or less knowledge of some of the strange things to be seen in the mountains of Virginia, in the neighborhood of Bristol, and further up the C&O Railroad, are very much interested in the reported findings in a mountain cave of a great quantity of human bones, including about 500 skulls. When the writer was on a trip up into that section some 10 years ago, he was told by some of the railroad men of the finding some years previously a number of human skeletons of peculiar form and evidently of a people who were 8 or 10 feet tall. The skeletons were said to indicate short bodies, long legs, and large heads, but were said to be undoubtedly those of human beings. When the writer evidenced signs of skepticism, his informant, an executive officer of the Norfolk and Western Railroad, assured him that there was no question of the truth. The specimens had been taken to the Metropolitan Museum in New York and the National Museum in Washington and were to be seen there. This same officer said that the mountains in the general neighborhood of the natural tunnel, quote-unquote, were filled with caves in the limestone formation, in many of which were to be found skeletons of what was evidently a prehistoric race. Dr. Hardlick of the Smithsonian Institution, who is now in the Benham country making explorations, is quoted as saying that recently found bones are probably as old as 1,000 years. So there you have that.
Man.
The Smithsonian weighs in there.
They did.
And verifies it. Interesting.
Right.
That's a very interesting.
Went to the museum and then poof.
Gone. But for the meantime, the Smithsonian says it's legit.
Right. They said it's legit. This other dude said it was legit. They sent it to a couple of museums.
That's interesting. So short bodies, big heads, long legs. They must have really been in, they're just like high-waisted pants must have been really in
Just
there.
imagine listening to this and trying to think that the giant skeletons were a hoax. Can you imagine? You have centuries of data, centuries of stories, multiple languages, multiple regions, multiple heights, thousands of newspapers. You're talking the craziest hoax of all time if these things didn't exist. Impossible.
Oh, yeah.
So why? I mean, that's the question, right?
Dude, I've got, well, like you said, I've got a whole bunch more right here in my hand, but I've got, there's 700 that I found. And some of them are other reports of the same, but from different newspapers like we talked about before. But there's no way in my mind that this could be a hoax.
It's a pretty elaborate hoax.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, just think of the time, and you've got these, you got the Smithsonian going out there. Back in the day, I found one that they actually sent it to it said they sent it to the Smithsonian. And there's just too much information, too many names. Like this one I read not too long ago, it had named off like 3 or 4 different dudes, with their credentials and where they were from, what museum or historical society they were with. To me, I agree. There's just too much information there for it to be hoaxed.
Yeah, a lot of these go to like universities, like they go to Yale or they go to Princeton or they go to some of these museums. I mean, they go to credible places, so people knew and saw this stuff and it was on the table.
Yeah.
And then it just goes missing. So some people say, well, where are the pictures of these giant bones? So I did some research into this, and L.A. Marzulli supposedly has some of the best photos of giant bones that they discovered in Catalina Island in Southern California. And that's about it. And the rest of them, if you go on Luke's Pinterest account, they're all fake.
It's a hidden page, guys. It's next to my wedding Pinterest page. I'll make it public though.
But you can't Google giant bones and there's a bunch of fake stuff that comes up right away.
There's a ton of fake stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So don't be thinking, oh, I'm gonna go Google this and find some giant skeleton. No, because L.A. Marzulli is the kind of guy who's trying to push this narrative and prove it with a lot of the guys with the Peruvian skulls and
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Yeah, he's doing a good job too. He does a really good job at that stuff.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I guess of all your articles, I mean, we could keep going down the rabbit hole. Is there any a last couple you want to throw out there and read?
Yeah, let me
One that'll just
read.
dazzle us.
Dazzle.
I want to be dazzled.
You want to be dazzled, huh? Well, this one's interesting. I mean, it's just a couple of them, but there's a giant woman too.
Oh, yeah.
If there were giant men, there had to have been giant women, right?
Yeah, it's a valid point.
I know, Luke. There's a question you're thinking right now that you want to ask our friend Travis.
Go for it.
No, it wouldn't be appropriate.
Okay.
We're all thinking it, Luke. Just ask it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously all the flesh has disappeared.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, so it's that question, right? Like, is it all proportionate, right?
Yeah. I kind of think they all were. I just think they were.
This is 2020 in a nutshell, guys. Right here.
Yeah. Yeah. You come around the corner.
No wonder that everybody's running.
Oh man.
When I was thinking about this episode, because I'm sure we'll do an episode on this at one point, I was thinking of like a nice, pure woman doing her morning like devotion walk through the woods in the Pacific Northwest, and she comes around the corner and just sees two Bigfoot.
Just a very excited like rogue Bigfoot male.
Wow.
Just ruins it for the rest of her life. It's just not.
Yeah.
It just crushes her whole life.
That would not be cool. Oh gosh.
That is frightening.
Hey, Travis, where are you, by the way? What do you
I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Oh, okay. Nice, man. I do a lot of work in Dallas, actually, of all things. Before the COVID, I used to be there all the time. I used to be in Dallas all the time.
Really?
But I'm in Nashville, like I said. Well, Franklin. Nate's in Nashville. He's Nate's a band guy. He's very, very cool and hip. I could only aspire.
No, I'm in Hendersonville now.
Oh, even better. I can only aspire to be that cool.
Even better. Yeah, well, one of these days.
Dallas, Fort Worth. My brother lived in Dallas up until last month.
Oh, really?
And he's moved to Puerto Rico. Yeah, he's moved to Puerto Rico.
That's nice. Yeah, I like it here. It gets hot sometimes.
Isn't Dallas like the Native American word for like bad water?
I wouldn't doubt it.
I can't remember.
Yeah, our rivers aren't that clear around here, so I wouldn't doubt that.
You got squatchy water down there, baby.
Squatchy water. I don't know what that even means.
Yeah, there's a lot of good places.
Hey, let's let Travis read here.
Okay, let's go with it. This is from Montana. Skeletons of Giants, 1903. The bones of a prehistoric man and woman found in a mound. Both were nearly 9 feet high when alive. Fossils and remains of animals alive also found. Big Timber, Montana, July the 2nd. Wonderful finds of fossils and bones of prehistoric animals are being made in the Fish Creek country by Professor Marcus S. Farr and the party of students from Princeton College. The party is composed, in addition to Professor Farr, of C.D. Thompson, Lawrence Thompson, S.A. Halsey, Gordon Forbes, Walter Kimball, Charles H. Dungro, and L.S. Azett. The remains of a Stone Age city have been found in which the bones of animals of great size, along with stone implements of all kinds, many of which are ornamented with gems. In a mound near the creek were found the almost complete skeleton of a man. The bones showed that the man, when alive, measured nearly 9 feet in height and was of a powerful build. Nearby was a skeleton of a woman, a trifle smaller in size, and at the foot of the skeleton was an animal that resembled a dog of today, except the animal must have been as large as a small horse. So that's kind of a interesting article.
It's a dire wolf.
So the old myth of Paul Bunyan and his big blue ox could be true.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a stretch, Nate.
That's a stretch of all the things we've said tonight.
I mean, how big does your axe got to be that you can make the Grand Canyon? Let's be real.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We live in reality here.
Yeah, you got to be bigger than 19 feet, right?
Yeah. Then our Franklin giant here. Dare I say that they found a Tennessee Titan here? Nah, I can't get any. All right.
We're talking to a couple of nerds that listen to Bigfoot podcasts, not football games on Sunday. You know what I mean?
I mean, I was just making a reference to a team name.
Hey, there may be something behind all that, though.
No, you're right.
Like the New York Giants.
Yeah.
I mean, there were giants discovered in New York, and oftentimes I wonder if there's something.
San Francisco Giants? The little giants?
Well, I think it got migrated over from these. I think it was the giant bones, and then they moved it over to giant buildings. But that's not. That's a lame. That's a lame mascot. A giant building.
Los Gigantes.
Come on.
No, but actually, the San Francisco Giants were actually from
New York. Yeah.
Initially.
Yeah, I think they found them. So we're talking big giants and big dogs here to get us back on topic.
I was gonna say, like, one of the things I'd like for our listeners is to, if we could get some copies of the stuff you're reading, Travis, to post on our Facebook page.
Oh, sure.
So people can take a look. And honestly, I think people will have a lot more respect for you reading these articles, because I got to remind you that when Travis is reading these, he's reading through a picture of an article from the 1800s or 1900s. So we're talking microfiche, a photo of a photo. So if it comes out a little choppy, it's because
it's hard to read them.
Travis is a great reader. I don't want you guys to think anything less than that. It's just he's reading really hard to read stuff.
It is hard, yeah. I appreciate that.
I think we'll put those up there so people can take a look for themselves and take a peek at this. It's a fascinating thing, and I know that in this podcast, Nate, we talk about blurry creatures and trying to understand these things that sort of are on the fringe, the things that live outside the narrative for one reason or another. And I just love this one. And I've been looking forward to this podcast, Travis, for a long time, or this episode of this podcast for a long time, just because I think it does sort of interweave so well with what we've talked about in the Old Testament, the Bible, and then the stuff we talked about with Bigfoot. I mean, it all kind of centers around, larger than life things, creatures, and now we're talking about people that were actually, or hominids or sapiens that were bigger than the ones we see now, right? Even bigger than like guys like Shaq, Manute Bol and the NBA people that all of our friends that are skeptics, me included, I guess, love to point out. But when you find 22 of these guys in a mound, or when you find 500 skulls, or complete skeletons of a man or a woman. I was reading some of these things earlier. There's some red-haired giants they found in a cave out in Nevada.
Lovelock Caves.
Made me think of Nate a lot, actually. I was like, maybe those are Nate's distant relatives. No, but they're like partially mummified.
Right. Yeah, I've read those accounts.
Yeah, and it's tough to. I mean, you think about it. If we're going to take those with a grain of salt, and also be like, hey, this is an actual report. You're not going to mess up a mastodon skeleton with a partially mummified human skeleton of that size. So I think you can kind of start throwing out some of these just straw man, red herring arguments that we see for this kind of stuff. And as always here, we're asking people to open their minds, right? This is what we're doing. Open your mind to something that lives outside of the narrative you're being fed every day.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your viewpoint too, is the way you're putting it out, because you're coming up with with an analytical mindset. You're coming at it from that point of view, and I really like that.
Thanks, Travis.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard because you when you start reading this stuff and you get in the Bigfoot community, you do kind of become a little bit on the believer side. But it gets weird though, because like the ones you're talking about, Luke, the Sideucas are the name of the giants in the Lovelock Caves. They were rumored to be able to jump and catch arrows and shoot them back at Native Americans. So you're talking like supreme athletes. And those were the rumors. But I think the thing is like the Native Americans, I think this is what they were battling. They came over here and they were like, oh man, and they're fighting these creatures, and they're locking them in caves, and they're burning them alive in caves. There's several accounts of this.
It's not really too much different than what we see in the Old Testament with Joshua, though, in the Promised Land, and finding this land full of giants, right?
Yeah.
I think we live in a space in our heads where we think about the ancient world, and we're the center of all of our own stories. So we put ourselves in that position with our own realities, and think that it was, a lot like the lives we have now, just minus the technology and the things we know, right? But there's a place for all of us to open our minds and really think about the possibility of this stuff being real, of there being big people, especially if you look at the Bible, and if you're a believer and you take the Bible at face value as not an allegory or a metaphor, and it's in there. I mean, and a lot of this gets glossed over on church on Sundays, guys, and it's in there though, and
it's there. Yeah, you're
it's
right.
there. It absolutely
Hey,
is.
Travis, I got a question for you. So let me just walk you through a little bit of my belief in Bigfoot. So when I started going down the rabbit trail of Bigfoot, it's evolved. Like, it kind of starts out like a biological creature, and then you start hearing supernatural accounts of mind speak and lights in the woods. and disappearing, and tracks going, like literally they're tracking an animal and then all of a sudden they disappear into thin air. Have you found yourself, as you've researched these giants, like, okay, I heard these stories of the Bible or whatever, over the course of 10 years, has there been an evolution of thought in what you've changed your opinion about some things, about what you think they are now versus what you thought in the beginning when you researched
Well,
it?
with the giants, and are you talking about giants and Bigfoot together?
No, we'll talk about Bigfoot next if you want, but I'm just thinking giants right now. Like, as you've come across more information, has it changed your view that you originally had when you read these accounts?
Not really. No, it just kind of strengthened my belief in God's word and what it says about these beings, the giants.
Just more and more hammering down. Here's more and more evidence.
Yeah, for sure.
To
Yeah,
the point where
that's what it's done. That's what it's done for me.
Yeah, because Bigfoot's weird because people actually still see him to this day, right? So
Yeah, but Duke told us they still see giants.
Very rarely, but yeah.
And trolls and little people.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know what the difference is. Like, let's say Bigfoot and like the mountain giants. Why are they different than each other? I mean, obviously, it sounds like one might be bigger. From what I've heard, the mountain giants are pretty large.
And you had a couple Bigfoot encounters.
I've had encounters with what I was thinking was a Bigfoot. I've had one visual encounter, a road crossing at night.
Oh, tell us. Do tell. I want to hear this.
Okay. It was on a December night, and I was driving down a county road.
Is this before you studied the giants or after?
This is after.
Okay.
Yeah, this is like 2015 when I had this sighting. It was about 7 at night, which by then it gets dark in December about 5 o'clock. So it's been dark a couple of hours. And I was just driving down the county road, and there was a car coming towards me. And so, our headlights are shining at each other. And then this figure runs from my right to the left super fast. And it was like a man. It was like the figure of a man with a slight back angle. And all I saw was its body, its head, and its legs. It's almost like it was running with its arms straight beside itself to try to conceal itself. But it passed the road, which little country roads are, I don't know how wide they are. They're probably
like a 2-lane road. You're talking about like one, yeah.
Well, 2-lane, but yeah, it didn't have any center stripe. Just enough for a couple cars or trucks to pass each other. It crossed it within 1 second, and so that really kind of creeped me out. And I know I wasn't seeing a shadow because there was a car highlighting it, like my headlights were hitting it, and another car was hitting it. But it happened within 1 second.
And it passed between the two cars?
It did. Yeah.
That's wild.
So I went back, like, during the daylight.
What did you think about Bigfoot? Because you're reading articles about it, right?
Yeah, somehow I stumbled over them around 2013, 14.
I would assume if you're looking for giants, you're going to see articles about Bigfoot reports, right?
Yeah, well, you know what? I never really searched into Bigfoot that much. I just kind of happened.
Like were you getting just keyword searches where it would come up and you find...
Right, yeah. I never really searched into that much. I started searching into giants. I heard about Bigfoot maybe when I was 10 years old, some sort of account, and you hear stuff as a kid, but I never was really into it that much. Here and there I would study it because I love, the unexplained and the unknown, but I wasn't like searching it out like I was the giants.
And those listening, like Texas is a huge hot spot. East Texas mainly, people have crazy encounters and reports of East Texas. And if you don't realize, like Texas goes into Louisiana, and you have a lot of
there's a lot of forests, that are connected. The East Texas, you're right. It's like a huge pine forest, basically, and it just kind of extends up, and they start to connect to, Oklahoma, and then to other parts of Texas as well.
Texas is a massive state. If you've ever driven through Texas, you can fall asleep in a car, drive all day long, wake up and still be in Texas. Like, you're in Texas a long time.
You're right.
There's a ton of area, and I think people don't realize that. Like, oh yeah, come on, Bigfoot in Texas. Well, Yeah.
Yeah, I was pretty shocked. I was pretty shocked. I mean, what creeped me out the most is how fast it was.
Mm-hmm.
And its head was about close to the tree line level of where like the tree limbs were cut, so you can drive, like tall trucks could drive through.
So you said you went back the next day though, so were you able to take a look at this whole scene in the daytime?
I went back, and then I started to notice that there was these certain trees that had been smashed, and it almost looked like something would sit at most times and monitor the road before it would decide to cross. Now, I'm not sure why it crossed. Maybe it evidently had to be booking it, because there was a pretty tall pipe fence where it was coming from, but that thing must have just cleared it as it was running. So the thing was probably, if I were to guess, between 11-foot range or something like that.
Dang.
Where its head was compared with the
That's a big boy.
Yeah, with the branches. Excuse me.
And that's just one. You said you had a couple other counters too, right?
Well, I've had encounters of like sounds in the forest and some lights at night. I could probably go on a long time about stuff like that.
And how much do you think Bigfoot and the giants mix? I think that's what I'm thinking. Like you're coming from both angles. I mean, there's not a lot of people who've done the kind of studying into the giants that you have, but also have seen a Bigfoot and had encounters. But that's naturally what everyone's thinking, in my opinion. Like, are these the same thing?
Right. The more when I've started to study into the Bigfoot Sasquatch stuff, I started to just think that maybe it's just an ape. But the more I look into it, there's some weird stuff like finding the trees that were squashed, almost like, and I got off the road, I walked onto the properties, and I found areas. It's like, wait, if I were a human, what would I do to hide from another human? I would do this. I would sit here and I would monitor the situation before I would cross. And so, honestly, I really don't know if they are giants like that, if they're connected to the human giants or not. They could be.
Physical or spiritual?
I don't know. That's a good question, because,
or as Nate would say, are they multidimensional?
Yeah, I honestly don't have a lot of stories about that. I've seen lights.
Yeah.
Tell us about I know we have. I want to hear about the lights. I know we have, like, we're dwindling on time here, but because we could turn this into 3 podcasts, I imagine. But
Okay, well, the lights. I was in an area where it was not far from where I had the sighting.
Yeah.
And so I was in an area at night where I thought I'd seen some trails. And so I was going to monitor that area. And it had been dark for a while. I think it was about between midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning. I was just sitting quiet and monitoring. And it was the moon was full that night, or pretty bright. And so I had some pretty good visual, but there was forest to my left and, in front of me and to my right. But a ways in front of me, maybe 100 feet, there's this flicker of light. It was like a little ball of light, maybe the size of an orange or maybe a grapefruit. It flickered twice, and then it had a pattern of 2 quick flickers and then a space and then 3 flickers after that. And it had a pattern. It flickered one way, and then when it stopped, it started immediately from where it started flickering, did the same pattern. And then there was maybe about a minute delay, and then it did the same pattern again. And so I was like, man, this is super weird. And I'd heard of stuff like that. I'd never witnessed anything like that before. And so I just sat there quietly, and then after the lights, I heard in the forest to my left, I heard what sounded like a vocalization, like an owl call, but it didn't sound like a bird, but you know what I'm saying? It sounded like somebody mimicking a bird. And then down in the lower area of the property, I heard like a branch break. And so to me, that kind of, the way I translated that was that these lights were warning me or warning them, or maybe both of us, to stay put. Or maybe it was warning them to stay put, and then they communicated with each other. And I kind of took it as like, you know what? I'm not going to see anything crawling across this trail if something else is warning them that I'm here. That's kind of how I read the situation. But honestly, I don't know what it meant. That's just me trying to translate it.
Yeah, and over the years, those listening, this is a common report. This isn't something that you're making up. I've heard this over and over and over again. The lights, the weird glowing lights, and even the famous Sierra sounds that the hunters saw, they reported, that they recorded, and you can hear that in our intro, the little chatter. They talked about the lights going in between trees, like almost like floating between trees. It's really weird.
Yeah.
Really strange stuff. I don't know anything about the lights. I've just heard it. I have no thoughts about them. Do you have any thoughts about what they might be?
I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but I have a feeling I know what they are. I think that they are spirits that are protecting them. And you hear all kinds of stories. Like I've listened to a ton of podcasts about this subject. After I had the encounter and seeing it, I kind of delved into some of these different podcasts and listen. So my personal belief is that they may be a spirit that's protecting them. I've heard of sometimes, somebody is out in the woods and then the battery just drains on their recorder or something weird happens. And I almost attribute that to some sort of a spirit. And I don't necessarily think it would be a bad spirit if it's protecting them. But who knows? I'm not an expert on it, but that's my feeling I got whenever I saw the lights, is that it's their protection. You
didn't feel fear or threatened?
No, not at all.
Man,
it's wild.
What color were the lights?
They were like, the ones I saw were like, okay, they looked just like a firefly, that color yellow, but it was way bigger. It wasn't a firefly because it was about the size of a grapefruit, and it was kind of bright that night, so I could see. My visual was pretty good. It was kind of in a field, where the sounds came from, they were in the forest. So that's how, some people will say that they think the lights may be those beings. Well, to me, what I experienced, it almost told me that the lights were something else that were warning them about me just kind of sitting back and hanging out and waiting to, catch them crossing this trail. But
man,
yeah, super, super crazy stuff. I mean, it kind of shocked me when I saw it. I was like, I can't believe I'm seeing this.
So you would say you saw the light.
Right?
Yeah.
I like that song.
You gonna start Bigfoot Church, Luke?
Me? Yeah, give me a tambourine. Let's make it happen.
Give me a tambourine.
I love it.
Nate, that reminds me. I've seen lights like that before. I hadn't even thought about it until he was talking about it.
Really?
Yeah. I saw him in a graveyard when I was in college. We went up to this town above Chico called Centerville, and it was me, my brother, my girlfriend at the time, one of her friends, and I remember we were just trying to really scare ourselves. So we went to this. It's supposed to be the oldest graveyard in the county, and so we went to this graveyard, and my brother wouldn't get out of the car; he was too scared. But I ended up getting out, and you could hear it was bizarre. It was the most bizarre experience, one of the scariest experiences of my life. We had heard stories. There was these urban legends about these headless dogs that would patrol this road up there and everything. So we went up, and a lot of these graves were unmarked, or that they were so old that they had like all of the engravings had rubbed off. And this is the middle of the night. But I remember standing there and like hearing, this is for real, hearing like footsteps almost, like it was like crunching underneath foot. I was like, stop. And we'll just stop and listen. And then this is in the middle of like nowhere. And in the back of the cemetery were these like three lights like came on. Like I thought at first it was like a house way back, like behind the graveyard, the cemetery, but there wasn't a house back there, and it wasn't like your experience at all, Travis. It was like unbelievably frightening.
Wow.
To where I was like, I was like, I know I'm not supposed to be here. And
Did they look like? Did they look like artificial lights or supernatural lights or?
I don't know if you
flashlights.
No, definitely not that. Like,
So there was no way you could have mistaken them for. Like,
no, because I know where that.
flashlights.
Like, I went up there in the day a number of times, driven by the same one. There's no houses behind the place.
Yeah.
There was anything. There wasn't flashlight. Like, you know the difference between a flashlight when you've ever been in the woods and been camping and.
For sure.
But I think it wasn't like the difference, and the reason I just thought of this and hadn't thought of it maybe, Nate, was that we hadn't talked about this, one, but two, like it didn't get the benevolent feeling from this. It wasn't like, oh, like just stay where you are, like you're good. It was like, get the hell out of here.
Oh,
and that's
man.
what we did, man. I mean, it was me and my girlfriend at the time, her friend, we just booked it. Like jumping fences, and I never went back up there in the night.
Sounds like some bad spirits going on there.
Maybe some bad juju. Yeah, I don't know. It was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't have hung around either.
Yeah, it was.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just want to reiterate that like lights, they're seen, they're talked about, and then there's a lot of people that go to the next level. They talk about lights, UFOs, Bigfoot, all in the same night. Weird stuff. But I don't know.
Yeah, remember we've had conversations about that, like with Tom and Duke, and talking about with Tom especially and his Native American connection. He just said there was zero connection between UFOs, and every time we talk about UFOs, I start feeling like I need to put my tinfoil hat on, and because it's just like I personally don't go there at all. But the idea that people associate that, what they would consider that phenomenon with Bigfoot, is always fascinating to me, because I don't know really where I land with that. But I have seen weird lights, and I didn't for any moment think it had anything to do with aliens or unidentified flying objects or anything like that. It was just weird, man. I think that's kind of what Travis is saying. It was just strange, like not what you expect to find in a place, at least for me. Otherwise, was like pitch black, like.
Wow.
You can't even really see.
Yeah.
You know.
I think we could probably wrap up, because we were all talking for so long. But I like to ask guests, like, I asked a couple guests, like, what's your best Bigfoot sighting and what's your best experience? I know this is different because you're researching. Like, what's one of the main things you've taken away? Like, what's like one of the main articles you read and just like you couldn't stop thinking about it for days? Because there's a couple stories of Bigfoot that really just rattled me, and I thought about them for months and months and weeks. There's a couple I can think of right now that I've heard that just stuck with me. Is there any of these stories and these accounts that have really just stuck with you, or just totally hit you hard and changed you as a person and what you think and feel?
Well, I would have to say that it's any of the accounts where you have multiple giants in one area or one mound. That would have to be the ones that really stick with me, because they just kind of just scream that it's another race. It's not just like we were saying before, somebody with gigantism. It's not some disorder.
Yeah.
It's an actual DNA. And those are the ones that just really kind of like have me scratching my head. When you have the multiple, like the one with like 68 of them, they were all 7 foot and greater. Like the 22 that were 8 foot on average.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, honestly, like some of the ones that, like the ones that are 19 foot, 18 feet, those really have me scratching my head. But I believe it. I mean, those stories are so like almost unbelievable. But then when you read the Bible and it says that they were as tall as the cedar trees, then you have to start thinking, well, what was Joshua up against? When he was fighting, why did God send all these hailstones and killed more of those Amorite giants than Joshua did himself that day when the sun stood still? And so it makes it believable. Yeah, it says that God killed more of them with hailstones than Joshua did. That the day that the sun stood still. for about a day. So that was a big onslaught of giants, and they must have been those big ones. I can't imagine going up against them.
You know, one of my last thoughts about all this is that there's a lot of violence in our history of people, Native Americans, in the Bible. There's a lot of accounts of violence. And there's a lot of people these days, because we don't live in an age of violence, where we don't understand the violence. So we have these weird conclusions where we just disregard half the Bible because, there's violence and I don't believe in violence. Well, what we're trying to say here is there might be a really damn good reason for the violence. Like,
right.
That's where I'm at. Like, I've never understood the violence. And now I'm like, man, if these creatures were walking around, you needed to do something about them, right? They're
yeah.
I mean, the history is they're boiling kids in stews and they're eating them and they're all doing all kinds of weird, evil stuff and perhaps DNA experiments. Who knows? But
yeah,
the violence is in our history and it can't be swept under the rug and it can't be easily explained as, well, that's just what they thought God was saying. No, there's specific detailed accounts of the violence and we have to address it. And I think it's important. And I think what you're giving us good archaeological evidence that, hey, this is what they were fighting. Right.
And I will say this, too, with that point that you're making, that God was merciful. I mean, there was a lot of violence, but God was merciful to the Amorites because there is an account that says he was talking somewhere and he said the Amorites, the iniquity of the Amorites have not yet reached its limit or fruition. And so he was like keeping track of them. And he wasn't going to judge them till their evil had reached a certain limit. So that to me speaks of mercy and love. And so he had mercy and love on them to a certain point. And so, and I maybe that's when he sent the children of Israel in there to give them the promised land. You know, I kind of picture that the devil knew that the children of Israel were going to end up going there. So he planted the giants in there to be a distraction and a hindrance and, to his people as they came in. But God was merciful. So for the people that are saying that, God, is hateful, well, no, there's evidence in his word that he had a time period and he had a mercy period for these people. They just never repented. And they were, they're still killing, they're still slaughtering, they're still being evil and pagan. And they were tyrants. I guarantee you they're probably tyrants.
Yeah, man. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed our phone calls. I've enjoyed this conversation. Do you want to? How can people find your work, your catalog? You want to plug your stuff, and you have an email address, and just whatever you want to say right now. How people can find you and get a hold of you and talk to you about this stuff.
Well, the best way to reach me is on Instagram. So it's giants_of_ancient America, all one word, on Instagram.com. So that's the best way to, that's really the only place I'm at right now.
Okay.
I've thought about doing some other things, but that's where I'm at. If you want to read into this stuff that I'm posting, that's where you find it.
Awesome.
Travis, when are you writing a book? Seems like you need to,
I know, right?
Need to compile. I mean, I'm serious. You need to compile this stuff into a book. I think this would be a phenomenal read. Pacing all the chronological stories together.
I mean, it's funny you mention it. To be honest, I've been wanting to do that for a long time. I just haven't done it yet. And I've actually started writing some. So
well, here's your impetus, man. There's 2 guys will buy it pre-order.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Well, hey, I appreciate it. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the chat, and it's been good. I think people need to hear this stuff.
I agree.
I don't think it's said enough. I mean, it doesn't have anything about salvation. It's not about your salvation, but it is part of faith. It is part of it's all part of God's word.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I think it's very important. The people know this.
I mean, as a storyteller, someone who likes stories and movies and do video editing, if you don't have the characters in the story, it don't make any sense. The Raphaim, the Amorites, the Anakim, all these different giants. I mean, they're in the story. Put them in the story.
Yeah.
Put them in the movie. The Raphaim.
The
risen ones. Those are supposed to be.
There's the Anakin, the Zamzumans. They had a lot of different names there in in the Bible.
And honestly, I think for me, it's a great case where the archaeology supports the theology, right? It's honestly just fascinating. It's fascinating to think about, because it's what is it, Jack and the Beanstalk? We look at back at our folklore and all of our history, and it's peppered with giants, right? And these mythological creatures, and that's kind of in a weird roundabout way what brings us to blurry creatures, and it's the idea that these things that go bump in the night, maybe have some factual background. Maybe there's some truth that, underlying all that. And I think what you're doing with Giants of Ancient America and uncovering, and these documented sightings and publications that existed, in the 1900s, it's work that we need. It's the message we need to get out there. And I think it's just a way for people to broaden their mind, open their minds in a way that just doesn't plod along the path of the narrative, right? I mean, this is this flies in the face of a lot of the things we've been told and a lot of things we've come to believe about, ancient America but by God, as Nate would say, there's things that go bump in the night and they're real.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, the funny thing, and you and I said this, Travis, a bunch, is that some of the most skeptical people are Christians about this stuff.
Right.
Like, I had a friend tell me straight to my face about this stuff. I'm reading the Bible as a pagan text by including the giants in the story. I'm like, wow. He called me pagan reading basically the way you're reading this, and it just blew my mind. I'm like, wow, this is the opposition you're going against. I mean, I'm sure people probably say
it's
crazy
just factual.
stuff.
It's just factual. I mean, I've had a preacher tell me similar. I was, talking about some of the giants stories, a couple years ago, and he's like, "Isn't there a lot other better things you could be studying in the Bible?" I was like, "Man,
no.
Hey, at least I'm reading my Bible."
Right.
No. Yeah. This is like the best part.
This is the best.
They left out the details.
Right. I mean, David was a good guy. He was fighting one of them. These are good stories.
That's right.
Yeah, you got a 25-foot long giant coming around a tree with a big old club hanging out.
And Goliath struck fear into all the Israelites.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he did. Like for 40 days, nobody would fight him.
He did.
Everyone's just, man. Well, guys, go to again, Giants of Ancient America on Instagram. Add our friend Travis Roy to your feed because, gosh, there's so much junk on Instagram. You need to put something good in your feed.
There's some fun stuff there. Some good reading.
Right.
Yeah. And you
jog your mind a little bit.
Yeah, I went down the rabbit hole. I loved it. I appreciate you, man. You might be one of the last dudes who has a compilation of all of these articles. One of these days, you might be the last guy to say, "Hey,
I
look."
need to print them off.
Yeah, you do.
I need to print them off on paper.
Put them in a book. Put them into a book.
I need to put them in a book.
Yeah.
I need to put them in a book before they disappear.
They might go disappear like everything else in the Smithsonian. It's just gone. But dude,
you're right.
We'll probably have you on again. I have a feeling this won't be the last one. But thanks for coming on the show. And
yeah, guys, I appreciate it.
Travis, appreciate your time.
Enjoyed it a lot.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Appreciate it, man.
Talk soon.
All right, later. See ya.